Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast, sponsored by the IBCA. We are a global podcast that shares the passion for the coaching profession. You will hear the stories of coaches from all around the world. We are covering the profession in game, outside of the game, and anything in between. As always, thank you for listening. We look forward to sharing the coaches' stories with you.
Welcome back to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast. We have an awesome guest today, Chris Abaray of West Pere High School, head girls basketball coach. Coach, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
So we like to start with the opening tip. We really find it interesting. Every coach has a different journey, a different path, right? We just talked about a little bit here before we got on, but kind of, tell us about your coaching journey and then, your program now and kind of basketball in your area.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Pittsburgh. I had a pretty uneventful basketball career. I was a good high school player, and then I ended up going and playing at a couple colleges. But I was plagued with knee injuries. I tore my ACL 3 times in college. So I ended up only playing about 1 year. I finished up at a junior college called Butler County Community College. And I decided to call it quits after that because I just didn't want to go through the wear and tear of it all. And I kind of took a little break from basketball. Finished my schooling at Temple University in Philadelphia, and started my teaching career in Philadelphia. And actually at a school that was kind of growing with the students. It's a charter school that's no longer open. It was called Leadership. And the cool thing about working in that school was one of the things that I was able to be a part of was starting a basketball team. And we started coaching some of the kids we had in 7th and 8th grade with the goal that we eventually would start a high school program playing in the public league and all that. And we got to that point. I coached for 1 year with starting the high school team. We played a JV schedule, but we were officially we were trying to get our PIA membership. But that took some time. And then it was kind of a eye-opening experience to kind of not only start coaching, but also you're kind of starting a program from scratch. It almost was like being a club program, playing all these established schools. So there was a lot of struggles with that. But it definitely, I would say, made me really interested in coaching basketball. I didn't really think I was going to want to ever coach when I first started teaching. I just did this to help out. And the more and more I did it, I was like, wow, this is kind of awesome. Then I met my wife, and she was working in athletics actually at Swarthmore College, D3 school out east. And she was in her journey as trying to become an athletics director. And after we had got married and had one of our kids, she was offered the AD's position at Buena Vista College in Iowa. So, here we are, after living in Philly for a long time. 2011, 2012, we're moving to Northwest Iowa, which was like huge culture shock for us. Actually ended up being, we were there for 5 years. It ended up being one of the coolest experiences of my life. I never thought, I didn't know what to expect. I was open to the change. I knew it was a huge opportunity for her career wise. I knew I could teach wherever. But within a year of us living there, I applied for a head coaching job at one of the local high schools, and I got it. And that was kind of the start of my high school coaching journey. But I mean, that was after my sabbatical from coaching in Philly. I took a year off while we were in Iowa, and I got to kind of take over established program. It was Alto Aurelia High School. And it was kind of neat because we have young kids and, we're living in a new place. And the one thing I really came to appreciate about coaching at Alto Aurelia was living in this smaller area, just the small community feel, how supportive people really were for the athletics and the kids and the coaches. You had a whole system of people that were willing to watch your kids and ask you over to eat dinner and just things that we weren't used to when you live in a big city. I was really, really taken back in a good way, just how amazing the community was, just around where we lived. But we knew we weren't going to be staying in Northwest Iowa for a long time. I knew, for my wife, that was a starting point for her career. And she got the call from Lawrence University in Appleton to become their athletics director. So 2016, we moved to Appleton, Wisconsin, and we've been here ever since. I took a head coaching job at North Fond du Lac High School for 1 year. Couldn't swing a teaching job there, so I resigned. And then the West of Pere girls job opened up, and I've been at West of Pere ever since. And I just wrapped up my 7th season at West of Pere. It's been I took over. It was a good program when I took it over, and we've been able to maintain it and grow it. And I think next year we have some state title aspirations with the girls that we have coming back. We have a group that just kind of came through, and it's interesting. I had a group of 4 girls group of girls that came through when I first started at West of Pere. A lot of girls that came in as freshmen and really grew into big roles for us early. And then to have kind of started over with a new group of girls 3 years ago, they're going to be seniors this year, kind of seeing this group through, and they really have a great chance to do some great stuff here in West of Pere. And I know you mentioned like the basketball in our area right now for girls basketball in the state of Wisconsin. I would say it's really kicked up in the last few years. We have a lot of D1 athletes coming out of our area. Allie Zabel from Nina, she's going to UConn, McDonald's All-American. We have Rainey Wilson, plays at Hortonville. She's up here this way. She's going to Maryland in a year. That's just a couple of girls. But we have a ton of girls getting D1 offers. It's really hard. Winning one playoff game in our area is really tough, just because teams are all filled with D1, D2 players. It's a real bear, but it's challenging, but it's really helped me become a better coach. And kind of gives you wanting more. Work. You got to work. You got to want to work harder to kind of get to that next level.
So you kind of hit on some of the things there, and we had kind of talked off air before the show started. But, I think a really good question just to build off some things you just said was, for a lot of coaches, we're adjusting to the changing landscape of coaching, whether it's different high school policies, things athletic directors want, AAU involvement, transfers, parents, pressure to win, all these different kinds of elements for high school coaches nowadays. And I think I was talking to somebody yesterday. I think the expectations for high school coaches are only growing. So for somebody that's coached for, over a decade now, as you have, what are some things that you would say to coaches on how to kind of adjust and deal with the changing landscape in coaching?
For sure, the biggest thing I would say is you cannot rest on your laurels and kind of that's the way we've always done it. You have to be open to change almost yearly, whether that be through understanding how social media works, understanding what your youth programs, that your developmental program needs from you, even as far as how you approach coaching the game. These aren't the same kids that we grew up as kids and we were coached a certain way. Kids aren't responding to the same type of coaching that we did. So, I think the open line of communication with kids is really important. They're more knowledgeable than we were as people. They just have more information at their hands. They know more. They're more versed. So you as a coach have to understand that and not act like you're always the smartest person in the room, and really give kids an avenue to express themselves, but also, still being that leader. So it's a fine line. But I really think, it just goes back to you have to be an open book. You cannot, you have to have your system and things that you want to accomplish, but you really cannot be open to change. If you're not open to change, it's going to be really hard to coach this day and age.
So kind of along those lines, and you had a perfect example of mentioning when you're in small town Iowa, you had that great support system, right?
Yep.
But at times, right, that's not developed. I'm sure that had been developed in that town for years and years and years, right?
Yep.
So, obviously when you've moved and gone to different places, kind of how did you promote the positive parental involvement, right? Because you hear all the stories about the negative, but there's ways of doing it to promote the positive, and it kind of, I guess I use there coach the parents as well, kind of how we're going to do things and how to support, but being positive with it.
Yeah, I think kind of how you carry yourself, you know, as a coach during games is really important. I always reiterate at the beginning of each school year, or when we have our like parent meeting at the beginning of the season, like I'm not going to be the coach that gets teed up. Kind of establishing those like game norms. I think everybody talks about the crowds at high school games and how rowdy they get, and a lot of times it's stuff directed towards officials. But letting parents know first and foremost that you're there to support the officials. And if you have to kind of model that as a coach on the sidelines, and sometimes people want you to get in the official's face and all that stuff. And you guys know, through coaching girls basketball, officials maybe they don't give you as much leeway as they do in the boys game. You say one little thing and you can get the officials pretty heated. So kind of being even keeled. I also think just constant contact, constant communication. I'm really a big proponent of email. I've tried all the different communication apps with parents and things like that. I've found over all these years still the best way to communicate a lot of thoughts and ideas and just share big picture stuff with your parents is through email. You can put a lot of thoughts into an email. You can write basically a book, but I think the more you communicate with parents, I would say I email our parents probably close to once a week, maybe every 2 weeks during the season, just with updates, schedule updates. And honestly, I think it's important that they know that you care about their kids. And I know that that's easier said than done, but you're never going to make them all happy. At the end of the day, this is it's sports, and parents and the kids, they invest a lot of time. By the time they get to high school, they want to play. And it's the first time in their lives where some of them aren't going to get to play, and it's the reality of it. You can even tie that in with AAU or quote unquote travel ball. You can find the perfect place to play and get that time, and then you get to high school and you're competing for, on the girls' side, a lot of times either JV or varsity. And if you're in that weird position where you're on varsity but you're like a junior, you may not see the floor very much, and that's a humbling experience for kids. And you have to have some empathy towards that, because it's not a fun thing to go through. But I think constantly letting the parents know that you get that and you understand that, but while also knowing you're not always going to make them happy as well.
Just to follow, I agree with something you said about the parent communication. Something that I have found that's really helpful is all of my levels, the coaching staff sends out a weekly schedule email, like Sunday this, Monday this, Tuesday this, went for the entire week. And I think it does it. It helps the families kind of plan and reset and kind of helps the parents understand, what that week will be like for themselves and their kids. So I like that you brought that up.
Yeah, I actually I think communicating schedules is probably one of the most important things that you can do. I mean, any little change or tweak, you have your group texts with your team and all that stuff, but I think, we forget sometimes what it's like to be a teenager and how much they don't tell their parents. So I think it's really important for us to be the ones that share all that, and then, still having some of those communication expectations for the kids, because we are trying to grow them as people, and we're preparing them for the world of adulting and all that. So I think on that same piece, you almost have to put the onus of communication back on the kid. That's one thing I talked about at our parent meeting at the beginning of the year too, is, if you can't make it to something, or you're going to be late, I don't want to hear from your mom and dad. I want to hear from you. That's an important thing. And every once in a while during the season, you'll get a parent that will communicate their kid, can't make it to this or to that. And I'll kindly just be like, well, hey, thanks for sharing that, but can you do me a favor and you remind them to communicate that with me, just to kind of have them go through that. Because again, I think we're partnering as coaches with the parents there. We're trying to grow their kids. So I think when you show them, when you're showing the parents like, hey, I want to help them be responsible here, the parents appreciate that too.
So this is a topic Todd and I talk about a ton, which is kind of defining success in your program. let's take out wins and losses. How do you kind of create and communicate that vision beforehand? Like, hey guys, this is how we're going to measure ourselves, whether it's statistically or something we do or something we say or something through our actions. Maybe take out wins and losses. How do you kind of create and communicate that vision to your players?
From a basketball standpoint, I think there's just those intangibles that you work on a regular basis in practice, and maybe in the off season. These things have to be evident in games. So like when you're watching film, you want examples of what it is that you're looking for, whether it be, we get in the paint, we get our feet down, and we make the correct pass out of the paint, make the correct read. If that's a staple in what we do in our program, that has to be something where we talk about it, we work on it, we work on the expectations. Whether it's something as simple as, I'll just give an example here. We talk about, we're a drive and kick team. I wouldn't say we're pure dribble drive, but one of the things that we really focus on with paint kicks are when our players on the perimeter make catches, the pass that we make has to be either neutral or positive, meaning that the pass has to be straight on to the shooter, or they need to be above the defender as a positive pass. So that's just one of those little things we can look at. Like, a lot of times we know when we're getting passes deflected, those passes that we're making are passes that we would call negative, where we're trying to pass through a defender or around a defender, as opposed to them being clear open or above the defender. Something like that, just that simple, a little nuance like that. When you can show that you're doing that and you can talk about it and you can work on it consistently through off-season workouts, practices, and games, it shows the correlation between all of it, and that's a success. As far as just the overarching part of being a part of the program, I think the biggest thing, especially on the girls' side, because I'm sure you guys battle it too, we're losing numbers like crazy. Whether it be to just a lack of interest in basketball, club volleyball, you name it. It's the being present, not just for the little things. It's being present for everything, and that means showing up for volunteering opportunities, showing up in the summer to help work youth camps. I think shouting those kids out and giving them the praise when they do those things is really important. I mean, obviously we're not going to over celebrate it and give them trophies or anything like that for doing that, but really making it known that that's an important part or a standard in your program. It matters a ton, because I think that's the opportunity where those kids that may not see the floor as much, that's an opportunity where they buy in and they can contribute and be somebody besides just maybe a practice player or somebody who doesn't, that has to, sees more time on the bench. That you have to show them there's more value to being a part of a program than just the up and down the floor 20 plus times a season. We spend a lot of time together, and, we have to value that time, whether we're on the court playing basketball or we're doing something together as a team. All of it matters, and all the people that make it up, they matter. And that's, I know it sounds kind of silly, but it's really what makes a team go. And I think it gets harder and harder to celebrate those things nowadays, kind of going back to what we had talked about, just the changing landscape. But I think kids, they need to know that there's a buy-in or a value to what they're doing, and you got to celebrate it all. And does that make sense to you guys, or am I just kind of talking in circles there?
Oh, that totally makes sense. That makes plenty of sense. So you kind of, we're gonna expand on this a little bit. You kind of mentioned your passes, right? And like that's how you're kind of looking at tracking how that kind of success, I guess, more on the court now, right? Let's move to the on the court stuff.
Okay.
Within your system, within what you guys are trying to do. Like you said passes, but what are you like tracking team wise and individual wise to kind of determine the success of what you guys are trying to get accomplished, concept wise and system wise?
Well, I mean, for sure, we're a volume 3-point shooting team. This year, our numbers dipped a little bit. One of our best players, one of our best penetrators, went down with an ACL injury at the end of last summer. So we were missing one of our primary attackers, and that kind of put a lot more on our point guard. And that actually we had to make some adjustments for that. but one of the big things that we really do value are paint kicks, because what they do for us is they create typically advantage drives or advantage shots where we're looking for double, triple gaps. A lot of times, and you guys know, with any type of dribble drive type of offense, once you have one player get downhill, all the dominoes start to fall. Defenders have to shift. So, it's when we look at our shot quality, typically when we're making threes or we're making better decisions, it usually starts and ends with a paint kick, and it's the quality of pass that comes out of that paint kick. And it's the timing of the spacers on the outside. If they're coming up too quick, or they're we call it kicking up. If they kick up too quickly, a lot of times that pass is going to be met by a defender as opposed to them waiting, till feet are down. So it's the spacers holding their space, knowing when to move, knowing when to cut. That stuff all matters, and I know for me personally, I want to find some better ways to kind of measure that stuff statistically. I mean, you can watch it on film and you can point out the good and the bad when the things don't happen. But I'm going to be working a little bit harder this offseason to have some finite statistics to show. But it kind of, at the same time, like we'll have a different dynamic next year. We're going to have I would say a heavier roster when it comes to just the depth. So I think some of the things that I'm going to be expecting will come a little bit more naturally with the players that we have coming back, and just their experiences. But at the same time, I want to have some statistical goals that we can reach. So that's something I'll be working on this off season. But if you look at other statistics that we're looking at, I think defensive rebound percentage really matters quite a bit. We tend to look at that. That ends up being a big stat for us. When I look at the games that we've lost this past year, you look at the offensive rebounds we gave up in those games, and that was a huge deciding factor, I think. And then, the one thing I've always loved, and I can't quite figure out it on lately, it's deflections. I used to chart deflections. I stopped charting deflections because a lot of times it was they weren't really correlating with. We had some games where we'd have a ton of deflections and it wasn't really correlating to anything positive. So it's one of those statistics where I've heard a lot of coaches say you should have X amount of deflections a game, and I'd like to dig a little deeper into that one too, just because deflections have to mean something more than just it's a micro statistic almost. Deflections don't always lead to steals. What's the goal with the deflection? Are you trying to disrupt offense? Are you forcing the other team to have to kind of reset themselves when you get a deflection? Are we talking about dead ball situations? There's just so much that goes into that. But I do think there's something to deflections. I think steals are obviously a finite stat, but deflections have a lot of definition to it, and that's another one that I think matters.
So I want to follow on something you said, because it's that time of year. You just kind of said you're doing it. I know Todd's doing it. I know I'm doing it. That kind of assessing that next year's team, and most people would say like we're a little nuts because the season just ended and we're already thinking about the next challenge. But how do you go about kind of deciding like these are the things we're going to keep, these are the things we're going to tweak, these are the things we may change completely just based on what you have coming back, etc. Analyzing last year's stats and looking forward. How do you kind of make those decisions?
I mean, I think you have to look at personnel first. I mean, I think as a high school coach, one thing I used to try to do was just get kids to buy into what I wanted to accomplish when I first started doing this. And some of it was good, some of it was bad, but you first get into coaching and you really want to have your coaching philosophies usually come from your past coaches and usually the coaches you've looked up to, so you're trying to do a little bit of everything, and you're kind of trying to piecemeal everything together. But once you find out what you really want to do, you have to hit home on that. I think for us, I look at footwork in the off season's a non-negotiable. We work on that all the time. I really look at that month of June when we're together as a time to really build skills and players individually. You're going to obviously have time in the gym together as a team, so you're going to get that team growth as well. But I think footwork really matters a ton. That's something we're always striving to be better at, whether it's just on the catch, finishing footwork, drives, footwork even for passing, all that. It's a skill that you can continually grow. I think when it comes to your personnel, it's looking at what you're going to get out of your top, 2, 3, 4 players. It's what's that next line going to look like? That your 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Can you go 10 deep? Because I think every coach's dream is to be able to go 10 deep all the time with their roster. But realistically, it's hard to do that sometimes, because that means your best players sometimes aren't on the floor, and that can be a big difference maker in a game. So I think it's figuring out, okay, I have my 3, 4 best players. I know how we're going to integrate things offensively with them, defensively with them. But then when they come out of the game, how does this going to look for us? What are we going to do the same? What are we going to do differently when we have players X, Y, and Z on the floor now, to keep us going, but also playing to their strengths? So that's kind of what I really like to look at. And there's a lot of thought that goes into that. That's one of those things in coaching. I think people don't. I think there's this perception, I think, with basketball coaches. It's like, well, it's not that hard, you just roll the balls out, you have kids play it and do this and that. And there is a lot of thought that goes into your personnel. And, every year it should be different, and you got to tweak your system to the kids that you have. And that I believe that wholeheartedly. And the more you do it and the more you're thinking about it, the more that you are putting time into that, I think the more success you see on the floor.
So before we switch over to our second half topic here, halftime adjustments. And then we talked a lot about players improving, but I want to talk about you and your staff improving in the off season, right? What are some things you do as yourself and with your staff to improve as coaches in that time between the end of the season and when you start up in June, and then you have that time again between June and the season? How are you looking to get better and help your program that way as a coach?
Yeah, I think you definitely have to meet as a staff. Season, as far as meeting goes, I think sometimes if you meet too early, there's too much still emotional attachment to that season, and you're at the point now where you have to kind of pull away from that, and you have to be forward thinking about it. So sometimes you have to take that time away to do some personal reflection. So typically it all starts with staff meetings in April or May, to kind of prepare for June. What's the goals in June? As a staff, what are we trying to accomplish? Looking at staff expectations. I've had some of the same staff members for a few years now, so as far as roles go, that's kind of nice, because you kind of have those figured out. But if you need to make a tweak to the staff as far as what you want them doing for practice or for preparing, that's important. So I think if you have an assistant coach who is a big part of your game planning, or maybe planning defense or the skills portion of your practice, you take a look at those micro areas of your system or your program, and you kind of you throw darts at it and say, are we doing right by the kids with this? What needs to change? What needs to improve? And I think one of the coolest things that I've been able to do, I love looking at other coaches' game plans for preparing for other teams. You generate a lot of great ideas. I think that when we make game plans for kids, I think we spend so much time putting on paper what we think is important, but it needs to be important to them. So I've really started to buy into the less is better. So every year, I brought up game plans as an example, but I think you have to look to keep peeling. If you think you got a good thing going, you got to start eliminating some things too from it to make it even better, not adding more and piling more on. And I think that's the biggest challenge as a coach in the off season. We are inundated with information and everything online looks great. You see people sharing their examples of their offense or this, what they do successfully, and you go, oh, that would work well, or that would work well. And then you kind of have to take a step back and be like, we got a good thing going here. I need to improve upon it. And I want to make sure that I'm doing it right by bettering myself as a coach, but I don't want to become this person who just starts picking up every little thing that I take in the off season and trying to apply it. I think so. There's that too. It's not you dare to be different, but definitely don't feel like you have to change every little thing that you do once the off season hits.
I'm stealing that quote. Dare to be different, but don't change everything.
Yeah.
So let's kind of talk. So with each of our guests, we kind of, the second half of the episode, we focused on a specific topic. And for you, we kind of want to focus on a couple things combined here. So kind of developing that basketball IQ, through work, through skill development. So let's start with, you're building your skill development from off season to in season. And this is actually something I do with my staff. I actually farm out the skill development, and they're each kind of the head coach of their own specific skill. And I kind of challenge them to look at the analytics and how it fits into what we do, etc. So how do you build on your player strengths, but then also kind of build or improve on their weaknesses?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that we try to accomplish in the off season going into the season is constantly working on that decision-making piece, because attacking is so important for us, whether it be in the open floor or even just in the half court. There are so many decisions that are involved in when do you pick your dribble up? When do you look to finish at the rim? When do you pass instead of attack? What are the cues? What are you looking for? You have to accomplish that through repetition, obviously. And I honestly, anything 1-on-1, 1-on-2, 2-on-2, all the way up to 3-on-3 or 3v2. We do a ton of that in the off season, and actually we do a ton of it in season. A big part of what we're trying to accomplish is any sort of drills that we do where we're live. There has to be a connection to what we're trying to get done 5-on-5. And with dribble attack, a lot of it has to do with the gaps that you open up, and it's that small window that you have to attack. And it's the biggest thing is reading that paint and the player ahead of you. It's not the player you have to drive past. It's usually the next player that you have to make the decision against. And so it's giving them opportunities in the gym to make those decisions and understand the floor, understand, where in the paint you want to go. When you get to the paint, when have you driven too far to the point where you can't finish or you can't pass? You're just in a bad spot. Those things have to be drilled over and over and over again. And I think you have to talk about it. And that's where the stopping and addressing and making sure that they're doing it right. Because I think the big misconception with small-sided game stuff, that a lot of it's free play for kids, and they get to just kind of figure themselves out and figure out what they're doing. There's a lot of instruction that has to go on with that part of your workout, and you have to hit on it. Something as simple as even in one-on-one stuff. If you're working on like a specific catch, I know a couple years ago I was really big on the split catch. And a lot of kids are doing that, where they catch and they're almost in like a triple threat, but with 1 foot leading and 1 foot kind of back, so they're able to attack. And then I was finding our girls were getting called for travels quite a bit, so that was a little mini skill that we had to tweak. Even though I have a hard time, on a side note, even knowing what's a travel and what's not a travel anymore on catches, because I see double hops and this, and it's almost impossible to call anymore. So you're trying to teach kids these little mini skills, but they need the time. But it can't be something that's not fruitful as far as growth is concerned. We're working on this thing, but we actually have to be getting better at it, and we have to show marked improvement at it. So there has to be a level of understanding that you give to the kids that, hey, you're not just playing 3-on-3 right now to play 3-on-3. We're focusing on a specific thing. I want you getting in the paint. If you're driving across the paint, you need to understand your feet need to be down before you get out of the lane. Otherwise, you're going to be, the spacing is going to be all messed up. So you want to make sure that you have the specific parameters within what you're working on, to build. And I feel like I'm talking in circles again right now, but I really think it's important that you just hit on little things and you drill it over and over again. It's important.
So, you mentioned your skills. I want to talk about it in terms of matching them up, right? Looking at it each year of your sets and your concepts. Like you said, you're a little bit ever changing, right? Maybe
Yep.
one year you get lucky enough, you got a 6'2" girl that you can kind of throw it to. So your approach changes a little bit. So when you're looking into that season, how are you marrying your skills with what you're trying to do as a team? So I feel like a lot of times, well, we're going to do this small sided game, like you just said, but we're not matching it up to what we're really want to work on and what's important for us to be successful as a team.
Yeah, I think a big thing is, most offenses, as you guys all, they start in transition. So it's we like to seamlessly flow. I don't say we have like an early offense or anything like that. We run the floor so we're spaced correctly. So if we don't get something in transition, we're kind of can just start offense. I think it's important for girls to understand their roles to an extent. In our dribble attack offense, we have our best drivers usually start up in our slots. They start high. But that doesn't mean that they will necessarily, based on how we run the floor. So it's making sure that in practice, when we're running transition stuff that flows into our offense, it's putting those girls in those different spots and then making them understand their shortcomings in those areas or their strengths. When you have a strong ball handler and a shooter in the slots, can they play off of each other? Do they have the space to work off of each other? And then you have to pinpoint examples when they can find each other in those spots. You mentioned having a 6'2" girl. We actually had a girl transfer in last year who was a 6-footer. We're not traditionally a big program. So we started the year last year with a 6-footer, and then she ended up getting hurt midseason. So we ended up, having to adjust our offense in season too. We went from having someone that we could give legit post touches to that could finish around the rim to going back to kind of our 5 spot ended up being more just a dunker spot, to make sure that we had that person in that spot to make so when we drove, we could draw that defender up and maybe get a little dump off, or they could be a screener for the weak side or something like that. So we kind of had to adjust our offense in season because of a personnel change that hurt us. So our practice had to change as well. What we started to work on skill wise in practice was a little different from what it was earlier in the season when we had our post.
So Todd and I have really started to focus on the offensive end, and we know defense wins championships, and both of us like to do very unique things defensively to pressure and different zones and things like that. But I was watching one of the games yesterday, and the score there was like 2-0 in an NCAA men's game with 15:23 to go in the first half. And we've seen high school games around us in the state finals, state semifinals that are in the 40s. The winning team gets in the 40s. So we've really started to focus on offense and try to develop offense and be better offensive coaches. So if you had to pick 3 skills to be successful in any offense, what would be the 3 things you would work on with your team?
One is definitely catch decision making, and I when I say that, I mean, do you have the philosophy as a coach where when your players catch? I mean, a lot of it has to do with, I think, the type of system that you run. A lot of motion offenses require a little more catch and patience while you wait for somebody to cut or something like that. But then you have other offenses where it's 1-second decision making, and I think that's a big staple for us. And I think it's really important to teach the players, because I think, as they play AAU, they go on to college, decision making is really picked up. And I think, you have to teach kids when they catch the basketball, what are they supposed to be looking for? When are they looking for their shot? When are they looking to attack? When are they looking to give up the basketball? And they have to do that in a really small window of time. So that catch decision making is really important. Footwork is one that I will always go back to. I'm a big Jay Wright guy. I love all his stuff. I wish I had as much time as he had at Villanova to work on it. You watch a lot of the Jay Wright stuff where they talk about him drilling home footwork, and you just see their practices where they it's like a pre-practice routine that it's like 60 minutes of them just driving, getting their feet down, filling spots and things like that. But I think footwork is really important. And again, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Being square to the rim, it's incredible when a player drives and they're square and their feet are where they need to be. What kind of stress that puts on the defense to have to react, because if they don't react, there's an opportunity to potentially score. But then you're also in such a great position to use your body to find people in space. But a lot of times what we find are kids, they pass on the move. It's a game that's sped up so much. And that's one of those things. It's not a overarching rule in basketball. I'm sure you guys have heard coaches will say, like, don't leave your feet to pass, but then you could probably find some examples in film where players do leave their feet to pass in certain situations. So to me, footwork is really important, and teaching the whens and when not to use certain footworks. It's not all universal stuff. They have to have, I like stride stops. I think stride stops are really important when you drive, because you can pivot out of the paint with the stride stop. But stride stops are not the end all be all. Sometimes getting 2 feet down and being square to the rim is really important. Sometimes finishing off a one is really important. Knowing when to do it, when you have the opportunity to do it. And then finally, I don't know if this is, I think it becomes more and more important every year. And I don't know if it's a basketball skill per se, but I really think the weight room is a huge part of a player getting better. Just from a confidence standpoint, even when you see players make strides in the weight room, and they know they're making strides in the weight room, you see that translate onto the court. And so I think pushing that as something important in your program is quintessential to being successful. I just do. I know it's not a basketball specific thing, and if you want me to share one more thing, I can. But I think the weight room is something that we need to be stressing a lot more of, it's a big separator for these kids.
I'll even add to that a little bit. I've been looking at like injury prevention too, like time on the court, like you schedule, like, okay, we had a tough game on Friday, like it's a real physical team. We've been practicing all week. What, on a Saturday, what can we do to give bodies a break, prevent injuries? Like you said, you had a couple injuries this year, and some may be preventable, some not, right? But whatever you can do to keep your players healthy. I think the weight room is a big part of that.
Yeah, recovery is huge. I would say most of the injuries we've had, my 7 years here, we had 2 ACLs this year. That's the first 2 ACLs we've had in my program since I've been here, and a lot of it I think just has to do with the wear and tear. These kids, they're playing year round. It's tough.
All right. So you talked about a little bit how you had a change this year, and early in the conversation, making changes but not changing everything, right? So you have your overall ideas, your overarching concepts, but every year is a little bit different, right? You may have somebody come in, like you said, injuries. So how do you develop your system around your players and team strengths for that year without completely flipping everything you did, right? Because that's not very successful either each year.
Right. You have to know who your obviously you got to know who your shooters are. For us, we want our wings spread out. They have to be people that can fill it up from the outside. So they, in the off season, I mean, I don't think it's that hard to ID a shooter. Although, you guys know, you sometimes have those kids in a gym where you're running shooting drills. They are lights out, but you put them in game type of situations, and those shots just aren't falling. That's why it's really important to me. Like, the time that you do have with these kids, you have to really make sure that you are putting them in situations where they have to be under pressure, because if you don't, it's never gonna emulate what you want on the court. But as far as changes that you have to make, I continue to go back. You typically know that 1, 2, 3, 4. You know what they can do. You know how you want to integrate them. But then it's those next up kids. Where will they fit in successfully on the floor? It was actually kind of nice. We had one of our probably our longest player in the program. She played a lot of guard for us. But when our big went down, actually, we had, when our two bigs, we had another girl who was dealing with some shoulder stuff. So we got a lot smaller, and her length kind of helped us adjust when we were basically 5 guards a lot of times when she was on the floor. But she was such a good rebounder for us, and she understood how to play all 5 spots on the floor. So I think teaching kids multiple spots on the floor is really important too. In this day and age, we teach most kids to play guard spot, whether they're posts or not. Or they all have to have those guard abilities, but they have to know what's going on in certain spaces on the floor, unless you specifically only want them playing in a certain spot on the floor. You have to have the forward thinking of, well, what if this happens or this happens? This player has to be prepared to go into that spot and know what's going on. So also just building that IQ and exposing these players to different spots on the floor, which I admittedly, it's something I want to continue to get better at as a coach. I think you never can be too good at that. You probably can look back at your practice planning and go, man, we could have probably given so-and-so more reps here as opposed to just giving more reps to these kids. So it's that self-reflection piece too. Like what can I look at in my practice plan and what can I do to change it? So I'm giving some of these kids more reps and more opportunities. But I don't like a lot of standing around in practice. I don't want there to be, sometimes you have to when you're doing game planning type of stuff. When you're doing walkthrough type of things. But other than that, we want all our kids on the floor competing and playing in different spots and being exposed to the things that we want to accomplish.
So when we talk about developing IQ, whether it's through different situations or unstructured games or small-sided games, something that we have done the last couple of years is, I just write a situation on the board and I let the 2 groups of kids coach themselves and my assistants, and I just sit there and don't say anything until the situation's over. And I think that's really helped us. But what are ways you kind of develop your kids' IQ so that when we get in a situation, your kids are like, oh yeah, we've done this?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the situational stuff. I think I've always, for a long time, when we do situational stuff in practice, I would kind of spell out the situation. You'd have one coach work with one group and one coach work with another, and you'd kind of talk them through the situation before you went and executed it. I think there is something to be said about letting the kids kind of figure that stuff out. It's amazing the little nuances and things that they don't know. They don't know. Like you have to remind them. On a made shot. When the other team makes a shot, when you take the ball out, you can run the baseline. Sometimes they forget, and it's one of those things. If you don't talk about it and actually address it in practice, you'll have kids take the ball out and actually like plant themselves out there, not realizing, especially when you're playing against a team that might pressure you a little bit. You have this kid who's just standing there in quicksand, and it's like, you could move, but I think giving kids that opportunity to talk through those things is really important. I also think developing scoring systems for the things that you do in practice really matter. I know a lot of the stuff that we do, whether it be small-sided games or even transitional stuff, we incentivize, or we decentivize where we take points away from teams when we give up offensive rebounds, or maybe it's a point. This year we really focused on anything offensively in some of our drills where they were timed. A turnover was an automatic kill of the drill. So that was like 3 points for the defense, and then it was an automatic kill of the drill, and then we started back over again. So we incentivize the things that we want to emphasize in games, so then kids understand the gravity of it. A turnover is going to give 3 points to the other team, because realistically in a game, a turnover could lead to 3 points for the other team. So that you kind of throw some worst case scenarios at these kids, and then you talk at the end about, okay, your team was in this drill, you guys were doing a great job, but then you got sloppy with your decision making and you gave up 6 points. And that was the difference maker here. And that's a learning lesson that they have to feel and practice, and you talk about it and make them reflect on it. So then in a game, when it happens, you can say, hey, look at this. This is why we did really well this half. We didn't turn the ball over. We didn't give that team the opportunity to get out and in transition and do the things that they're good at, because you took care of the basketball and you're able to set yourselves up defensively nicely. So you have to have scoring systems, I think, in your practice drills that emphasize the things that you want to get done and also the things that you want to avoid.
So as we move into our last two segments, there's been a lot of great content in this episode so far. But the first one is called 30-second timeout. It's your opportunity to talk about yourself or your program or something you want our listeners to know about, or any other topic you want to discuss, or turn the tables on Todd and I and ask us a question. It's as we always joke, there's no referee in your timeout telling you your 30 seconds is up. So this is kind of your platform.
I don't think I have anything to say about myself. I think I'll take a moment just to shout out my team. The girls we have coming back. We have a big senior class. So Faith and Ella and Madison and Ava and Olivia and Anna and Alexa and Clara and McKenna and Cassidy. I doubt they'll be listening, but all those girls, we really appreciate the work that they put in. And Mia, Mia's the girl, our posted transferred in. I got to always add her in. These girls, they put a lot of time in. They're great kids, and they're fun to be around. And I really can honestly say, in all the years I've been coaching, this is probably the most fun group that I've had, as far as just the togetherness on the floor. And they're just they kind of give you a little bit of a spark as far as as from a coaching standpoint. The personalities really matter. I think as coaches, we want to have develop relationships with kids that are natural. You can't fake it. But these kids, they've made me a better coach. Because I know how much they care about the game and each other. So I just wanted to shout them out. I'm excited for them in this off season and what they're capable of, and some big goals ahead that I think can be met.
That's awesome. Last segment, quick hitters, just kind of random rapid fire questions. First one, your favorite skill to teach.
Favorite skill to teach? I think anything around finishing at the rim, with footwork, deciding when to go off one, when to go off two, the things that go into that. Is the defender walled up? Is the defender a step ahead of you? Is the defender behind you? These are things these are quick, rapid fire decision-making things that kids have to learn. And the more time you expose them to it, the better off they are. Because it's the highest percentage shot in basketball is right around the cup. So you got to be good at it. And when you're there, you got to make the most of your opportunities. So I love teaching that. I think there's a lot that goes into it, and you got to drill it and hand that decision-making over to them.
All right. So as a Philly guy, what's the right way to eat a Philly cheesesteak?
I can tell you my way. I'm not, obviously I think there's nothing but fried onions on it. I see a lot of cheesesteaks out and about where they'll put like mushrooms and peppers and stuff on it. I don't get it. That's not a Philly cheesesteak to me. In Philly, a lot of people, they'll argue about the type of cheese that goes on it. I'm a provolone guy, but I know Cheese Whiz is a go-to for a lot of people in Philly. And then I'm a ketchup and mayo guy. Some people are just ketchup. I do ketchup and mayo. And if you're going to get a cheesesteak in Philly, you got to avoid Pat's and Geno's. Do not go to those two places. They're kind of the tourist traps. There's too many good places around the city to get cheesesteaks from. Ask people, they'll tell you, but don't go to Pat's or Geno's. It's not good stuff.
There we go. We got some tourist info. I like it. All right. What team you watching, men's or women's, in an NCAA tournament? Somebody you've seen that you're interested in, kind of like what they do. Maybe you like their coach, whatever it may be.
On the men's side, I mean, I'm a Pitt guy. I love Pitt, so I hope they get in. I have a feeling they're on the bubble right now. I don't think they're going to. I think NC State winning last night put them out. But from a sheer coaching standpoint, I love UConn. I think Danny Hurley runs amazing stuff. Their sets are just unreal. I mean, the amount of things that happen in some of their actions are just incredible. You look at that and you're like, oh, that's awesome. And then you're like, how long would it take me to teach my team to run that one? Holy smokes.
Right.
So Danny Hurley, I really like. On the women's side, it's crazy to me how women's college basketball, and it's crazy in a good way, how the star power has shifted. Like in men's college basketball, most people couldn't name 5 guys, and on the women's side, there's so much more star power. And I think it speaks to obviously the girls staying in longer, in school longer. You get to know who these players are. But there's a little bit of everything, UConn, I think they still have their staples that they always do, and they run. Gino runs some good stuff. I love watching South Carolina. I think Dawn Staley does a great job. She really gets the most out of her teams all the time. You got these dynamic players, like obviously, everybody talks about Caitlin Clark, but I mean, she's fun to watch. I mean, there's just kind of a pick your poison on the women's side. And I really think there's like 4 or 5 teams that could win it all this year based on how they're playing. So I'm excited. I think I'm a little more excited for the women's tournament than the men's tournament for sure.
I always love when the other day I was watching UConn, and behind Danny Hurley is his dad. And one of my favorite books is The Miracle of St. Anthony, just about his dad. So I always think it's just funny, you got him, and behind him is maybe the greatest high school coach of all time.
Actually, it's funny you say that. The Miracle of St. Anthony is my favorite book by far.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've read it a million times. It's my favorite book. There's a quote in there, and it's not one I'll say in here, but he's talking to one of the guys on the team about his shot. And I'm sure you've read the book, so but he has some choice words about the other things you can be doing when your shot's not falling.
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about. So
yep.
That's a great one. But one thing out east, if you've ever from being out east, having the opportunity to watch Bob Hurley coach, it was, I mean, I would say Bob Hurley is probably my favorite coach of all time. But having had the opportunity to watch him coach, it's just incredible. He's a throwback for sure, but man, that guy had some really good stuff as far as practice goes. The drills that they ran, and he was really a stickler on just a lot of the footwork stuff too, and guys knowing how to use their feet and just drilling that stuff home. Love Bob Hurley.
So if you didn't coach basketball and you had to coach something else, what would you coach?
Oh man. I don't know. Maybe football. I don't know. Honestly, I've been such a basketball junkie my whole life. I can't see myself coaching any other sport. I just, I like lifting weights. So maybe in the weight room, I possibly like a strength coach. But other than basketball, I just couldn't see myself coaching another sport.
All right. Something now that you wish you had known as a young coach.
I think we've hit on it a ton in this conversation. Playing to coaching to the personnel that you have. Again, I think when I first started coaching, I was trying to run a 1-3-1 defense with trapping all over the place because I saw it somewhere and it looked awesome. And then, offensively, I was trying to incorporate flex because we ran it really well in high school. But then, I was like, I don't even like flex. Why am I doing this? You're just kind of like you're going to piecemeal all this stuff together. Then you're like, I need to kind of come up with my own system and my own philosophies here. There's a lot to learn. And this goes back to advice to younger coaches. I really think there's a lot to be said. People talk about playing experience. There's a relation that you can have to players when you've played basketball. We've all played it. But I really think to coach, You got to be able to put that ego aside. Your playing career has nothing to do with your coaching career. They're two separate things. And the things I learned as a player don't have a ton to do with things I've learned as a coach. Your coaching journey is a totally different thing. And I think that's important to embrace and remember as well.
So last one, I kind of tweaked this one just based on something you've said. For a basketball player, what do you think is if you had to pick one lift in the weight room, what would they do?
Probably squat or deadlift. I mean, I think both of those have a lot of transfer over to the game, the explosiveness. They're functional things that you're doing, and I think they both have a place. And I also just I don't know. I think the thing about those things are, they're ones where you can make a great gain and then all of a sudden you plateau and you don't make gains, and then you got to keep working and you to add to it and to get more gains. And I think that's a perfect tie into basketball, because we plateau quite a bit in basketball at times, and you still got to put the honest work in to ascend.
Well, Coach, thank you for jumping on with us today. It was a great episode. We put a ton of stuff on our social media live throughout the episode. I think this is definitely going to be one that our listeners learn from. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast in partnership with the IBCA. Please be sure to rate us on whatever platform you are listening and give us a 5-star rating. For more show content and updates, please follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout. As always, thank you for listening. Tune in next time for more content on the court, off the court, and anything in between.